We are glad to have with us on my script here for a young professionals panel, global perspectives on the future of humanitarian action. It's being hosted by Naomi Davis, is with the Forage Center. She's a program specialist, but she was also my student at George Mason University. So I'm always glad to have Naomi, and she's going to be facilitating this. David Tragat is with the Jamestown Foundation, where he is a program associate. Zena Abulism is a senior new business development officer with Save the Children. I know she's in Cairo. And Jacob Kovar is a program manager for Ethiopia, and he's with the Czech Development Agency, and he's in Prague. So we have, and David is in Washington. So we're spanning a little bit of the globe today. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Naomi. We have 45 minutes. Hopefully we'll get some good questions at the end. So Naomi, take it away.
Thank you, David. I'll share a tiny bit about my background because I'm about to ask y'all to fill in more about yours. I've done organizing, research, and violence prevention, and I'm going into a position in housing policy. So I haven't been as hands-on with humanitarian aid and development as you all have. I think as y'all introduce yourselves, everyone watching is going to be like, is this really the young professional panel? Because y'all have so much experience. I don't think the resumes look very young professional. So I'm excited to have y'all here and have all of your wisdom and experience in the virtual room. And as David said, I was also alum of the humanitarian simulation that the Forage Center puts on, a fellow, and then now a program specialist. And so when you introduce yourselves, I'd like you to take 2 minutes to share about your professional background, your academic background, and then what is your why? Why did you choose to be involved in the field? And I know there's many names that people use, so whatever you consider your field to be, please share what your why is for that. And if maybe we could start with Zaina.
Sure, thanks, Naomi. So hi again, everyone. This is Zaina. My journey or how I started in this field actually started in the Midwest. And so I went to university there. I worked on outreach programs for refugees and migrant communities. Really what got me started is I think my background and my ability to connect with both sides. So being in the Midwest, it's not a very diverse community. So being able to have that language skills to communicate with the locals there, but also refugees and migrants there. So I started working with organizations like Lutheran Social Services, which is one of the major resettlement agencies there. I worked with state agencies for emergency services. And then those years really built a strong foundation for how I see whether it's humanitarian or development work. It allowed me to get also hands-on experience on the ground. From there, I actually moved to impact communications and donor engagement when I moved to DC. So on a more strategic or a more higher level, I worked with both Operation Smile and Save the Children for a while. And it gave me a very different perspective on how storytelling or partnerships can drive change. So change on a more strategic or a higher level rather than the implementation or the field work. That eventually led me to doing a consultancy for Save the Children Egypt, which is my hometown. And once I moved back from the US back home, I transitioned to a full-time role with Save the Children. I started with grant management and then moving into business development, like David mentioned. So really my work these days, and it's been a year now, focuses on creating strategic opportunities, donor engagement, and making sure that we secure the funding really essential or crucial for being able to implement programs on the ground. From an academic perspective, or my academic background, I hold a bachelor's in emergency management and communications. And then I also did my master's in international development with American University in DC. And I think the last point was why this field? I don't think I ever had a tangible answer, but I always felt like I need a job with a bigger purpose. I was privileged enough to have a very strong education growing up, and I felt like I need to use that to help bridge between people in my home country and the region and also people abroad. So it really felt like the right fit for that. I think that's all, Naomi, right?
Thank you so much. I'll pass that to Jacob.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to see everyone. My name is Jacob Kovar. I'm from Prague, Czech Republic. So currently, I'm working as project manager for international development projects at the Czech Development Agency in Prague, and I'm focusing on projects in Ethiopia. Czech Development Agency, I think it could be described as something similar probably to USAID. We are Czech Aid, are much smaller. I think that we are a governmental organization under the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yeah, I've been working on projects in Ethiopia for almost a year now. Or prior to that, I worked for projects in Bosnia and Herzegovina in Eastern Europe or Southeastern Europe. And before that, I was also working there as a PR or PR managers. That's sort of how I evolved at the agency. Eventually working on projects in Africa, which I love and which I always wanted. And yeah, part of my academic background, I studied my master's degree first in Prague, Czech University of Life Sciences. Studied social sciences, social anthropology, cultural anthropology, and did two semesters abroad, one in Sweden and one in South Africa. And after I finished this university in Prague, I went to study at Arcadia University in Philadelphia, this program called International Peace and Conflict Resolution, through which I also met David Smith, and the experience with the Forage Center with the humanitarian simulation, and why this career or this job that I'm doing right now. I have to say I really I think I have it kind of similar to what Zaina said. I was also really privileged for being able to study. I studied for university for I think 7 years, and then I was supported by my parents, and I learned a lot of about different conflicts and different wars and around the world and different people around the world. And I felt I want my job to be meaningful. I want to have some good impact or positive impact on other people. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And David.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi, and thank you for having me. My name is David Traugot. I'm based in Washington, D.C. In May of 2023, I got my master's in international peace and conflict resolution from American University, during which time I focused on sub-Saharan African conflict and peace building, had some internships and research projects in Kenya and Rwanda during that time. And that kind of led me into my first professional position in development at the National Democratic Institute, where I focused first on Sudan, Malawi, and Zambia, and then fully on Ukraine until this February when the funding crash happened. This year, I've done a lot of volunteer work. I spent the summer in Ghana, where I am working on starting up a nonprofit organization helping vulnerable children in a small community 1 hour north of the capital, which just got 501c3 status. It's called Relief for Children, if you wanted to check it out. And I work now for the Jamestown Foundation, which is more in the realm of international security, and we exist to kind of figure out and notify people of what places like China and Russia are trying to do and what their next moves might be. My why, I graduated with a bachelor's in history in May of 2020, and I got that bachelor's. I always loved history, specifically conflict history, and I was at home with my parents during the pandemic, and I said, where do I go from here? And then I realized, modern day conflict kind of interests me, and there's a lot of work to be done in this area. So let me explore some opportunities here. And then I found that AU program and started the next year. And that's led me to a very interesting and fulfilling career thus far that I'm excited to share with you all. Thank you.
That's awesome. I think I had a professor that said that anybody that works in peace building, that shouldn't be their only field. It should always be peace attached to some other field. So I hear that in all of y'all's experience, that you're bringing in other aspects of your knowledge and interest into peace building, or bringing peace building into the fields that you're working on. I want to encourage people, this is, the limitations of this format. We don't really get to see you or hear you. So anybody that is watching, please just put stuff in the comments, even if it's just, support or questions, whatever you have. We'll have a Q&A towards the end, around, I'm lost with the time zones right now because I'm towards the west, but what's the Eastern time? 3:35. Well, it'll be 3:35 where we move into Q&A. So please keep engaging with us before that. You don't need to wait till the end to add your questions. I want us to talk about what David was alluding to or saying about the funding crash and all of the implications that is having on the field. I think beyond, even before that, there were a lot of changes going on, but that is a big reason why we've pulled together this panel, is to hear, like, what do y'all think? What are you seeing in the field? And so for you and your roles, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing? What are you most aware of in your specific countries that you're working with and projects? And then how are you responding to them? And then if you would like to add, what do you want the policymakers and humanitarian leaders to consider in the future in light of those challenges? So big question, but I kind of like popcorn style. So if you are drawn to one side of that question more than the other, just unmute and speak up, and we'll hear your thoughts about the challenges you're facing and how you're responding and how you would like policymakers and leaders to respond.
Yeah, I think I can start. So I think what happened for this year, at least in the US, was USAID and foreign assistance in general was really the first casualty of this administration, because the purpose and how the apparatus of humanitarian aid functions has never really been adequately explained to the general public. You know, when I had my job at NDI and I started explaining to my family members what NDI existed for or exists for, it's still functioning, to bolster foreign governments, you know, make them more democratic and efficient. And the first thing that they'd say to me is, well, we need to do that for our country. And the connection between the work that we do in foreign countries and how it comes back to the US, it was never really in the national conversation. So when it got axed, for really 1% of the federal budget, people didn't really seem to grasp beyond the immediate devastating impacts it had around the world with the most vulnerable. People never really understood the benefits, the return on investment that Americans got. And I think that that lack of national conversation is what caused it to be on the chopping block. Despite this.
Sorry, could you briefly speak to that? Like, what are some of the specific casualties, as you say, you've seen, and what do you think Americans should be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So as the US, I think generally the work that we have done through USAID and through humanitarian assistance has saved lots of lives and has generally made the world a much safer and prosperous place. Of course, that there are caveats, and the old system was imperfect, but the idea of USAID and how the system functioned, people never really even knew what USAID was and how it contributed to the communities that we were serving, as well as how it contributed back to the US. So when the Trump administration put that institution in their crosshairs, there was an outrage in DC. But outside of that, it just kind of died quietly. And that's something that has really stuck with me.
Yeah, Jacob.
No, I just wanted to jump in and sort of give perspective on this topic from a small country in Central Europe and Czechia, and how this all influenced us as well. And like within the days of what happened to USAID. So as I mentioned, I work for the Czech Development Agency, and we prepare, or we write project proposals, right? And then sort of NGOs or even companies would apply for these projects. And our biggest project implementer is an NGO, humanitarian NGO called People in Need, and they are quite big even for our Czech environment. So, and they not only do humanitarian work, but also international development cooperation, which I do. And we could see how much this impacted them, because they had to fire so many of their staff. And actually a lot of them I knew from working from before, and they were like big experts with 10 or 20 years of experience in working, which eventually benefit a little bit of my organization, because some of them went to our organization. But I was really surprised how this sort of USAID cut impacted them right away and so drastically. And yeah, it's a tough situation, because now, for instance, in Czech Republic, our government is changing right now as well. And it feels like this government is going to be more of a right-wing government, or more of a government similar to what the Trump administration is. So we even don't know how it's going to impact us in the Czech Development Agency. Are we going to get cancelled? Are we going to get cuts? I mean, we already got cuts. Not sure as well.
Thank you, and I'll pass to Zena.
Yes, just to echo what everyone said, I think even the impact reached here. So if I'm going to talk about Save the Children, but all NGOs and country had the same impact. A quarter of our portfolio was cut, and what was very interesting is the fact that we've actually seen this pattern after the US aid cuts across various governments, whether it's the GIZ, German corporation, Swedish. To me, and I don't know, this is just my own assumption, it felt like if an agency could get away with such big terminations and cuts, we could reduce our funding. This wouldn't be seen globally as something that's unaccepted, for example. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, is not just the US government cuts, but the cuts from other governments that kind of cascaded afterwards. And in a very critical time. So in the context I'm working in, where we're actually surrounded by two of the major crises right now, whether it's Sudan crisis or the war in Gaza. So it's a country that with extreme displacement happening into Egypt, but also the work we do to support those in these two regions. So it was not, I think, a good time. It's never a good timing, but it was a very critical timing. And I echo what Jacob just said. I think we lost, whether Save the Children or all other organizations, so many of the very talented staff members we had. I think what was quite interesting, and maybe it wasn't touched on yet, is even grassroots organizations were impacted. You wouldn't think they would be, but because a lot of them are implementing partners for bigger organizations, they're like Save the Children plan. And when the US government cuts happened and the projects were terminated, the grassroots organizations, which were kind of like sub partners for us, also lost their funding. And if it was a quarter of our portfolio, to them, sometimes it was 100% of their portfolio. So it even impacted multiple levels, whether locally or at a bigger NGO level.
Yeah, thank you for kind of encompassing all of that, everyone was impacted, regardless of country, but also regardless of level that they're working on. I'm wondering when the funding shifts, obviously the organization takes a shift too, but also maybe even the mission or the scope of what people are working on. So what are some of the models that y'all have seen shifted in how people are approaching humanitarian aid and development? And, without getting yourself in trouble, do you agree with them? Do you think it's going in the right direction, or the response is appropriate to meeting the moment that nobody really wanted to meet with all this loss in funding? Or do you have ideas on how we can be responding in a better way than right now? Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
So the way I see it, I think there were two routes. Initially, there was a survival mode. So I feel like the whole sector kind of shifted towards and at least in the context, I mean, when we say humanitarian aid or humanitarian projects, very different from development. So it was a very big shame to see that most of the focus happened to be on humanitarian, because obviously this is where the bigger need is. But then people forgot that development work is also needed. So I think this was our first response was, you forget the idea of which is not a good thing, but we had to let go of something. So projects that would bring sustainability, or projects that would be long-term, were not a priority at that moment because of the available funding. So we had to focus on life-saving interventions, whether it's cash assistance, health, and so on. That's the initial perspective. But I think in the background, what we're trying to do, and I can't tell if it's working or not yet, but is to find different ways of fundraising or innovative ways of financing. So what's very different, and which we've never had in the country office, is the idea of whether it's result-based financing, innovative financing. Working with corporates is something we weren't focused on in the organization, and we mainly depended on institutional funding. So exploring the private sector, exploring the idea of result-based financing, and maybe approaching donors as partners, which is, we've always said that, but truly approaching them as partners rather than just people giving us money, and being a project-based organization is, I think, the big shift that we're trying to do. But that's definitely going to be long-term, because it takes time to build that trust.
Thank you. Jacob?
Yeah, I just wanted to really quickly, I just had a thought about sort of this bigger, I'm not necessarily talking about the USAID cuts anymore, but in general about the challenges in this field. And I don't know if it's the same case in humanitarian sector, but I think it could be definitely in the development sector from my side, that one has to always, and I'm so sad about it, there's always politics involved, right? And then especially because I'm under the ministry as well, especially. So, and we had cuts as well, right? So the frustration about me preparing a project proposal for 3 months, and our organization spending money on preparation of projects, and then being given the directive that this project is not going to happen, that we don't have the money for it, we have to shift to different sectors or different sort of interventions that I don't necessarily agree with. For instance, maybe this approach I don't like as much, but we all have to listen to our bosses, and that can be frustrating as well. But I don't know about in humanitarian sector, but that was my experience.
Yeah, so from my side, I can speak to NDI and to my current work at Relief for Children. I know that NDI has shifted towards trying to look for private funding through donors or foundations. And right after the cuts happened, NDI started fundraising for the first time in a very long time. And to my knowledge, that was a way to shore up a little bit of the losses from USAID, but it hasn't really come close. The topics that they're soliciting donations from are often deemed less controversial in the US lens. So I think they're starting to look at just political party functioning, making sure that elections are fair, free, and safe, which was the work being done, but there was also some social work done too that was cut off pretty quickly and actually removed from the website. For Relief for Children, I'm trying to use this moment as a way to improve development. I think there were some imperfections that we can take out and kind of build back stronger, hopefully, in the next couple of years. And what I'm trying to do is cutting operational costs on this side in the US to basically zero and putting as many resources as possible to the staff and the work in Ghana. And we're really reaching out to individuals, but by and large, I think individuals are still very generous and they're looking for ways to help. And I think that the cuts have given them a reason to search out a way to contribute more. And we're really directing those resources to fulfilling the basic needs of children and empowering them to follow their own dreams and then live a life, sustainable and fulfilling life that they can lead for themselves and their families long after they're gone.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing like a lot of adaptation and pivoting to both the political. I mean, I don't think the funding is distinguishable from the political influences. Like that's kind of why it's happening. But being creative about private funding and individuals and how can we change the organizational structure and the cost of running it. So I think there's some through finds in there, and I want to give James a chance to ask a question. James, I really appreciate that question, and I believe that's directed at David with the American context, and I want to expand it to David, you answer first, but for Zaina and Jacob as well, just how are you responding to increasing nationalism when a lot of humanitarian and development has been attempted multilaterally, and how are your organizations responding to that? And yeah, because I think that applies to more than the US when people are nationally focused.
Yeah, so James, thank you for your question. The Jamestown Foundation is a think tank that exists much more in the world of international security rather than development. It's kind of been a pivot move for me. And what we do at Jamestown is we have people who are fluent in languages like Russian, like Chinese, who go into primary sources and dig up information, as we say, shining light on adversaries in their own language. And we are nonpartisan, but we're not neutral. So we figure out what's going on, what stories are worth sharing, and we share that with the general public and with policymakers who have the power to make the right choices and the right decisions. With that being said, I am going to try to bring a little bit of the development language to the Jamestown Foundation. I know that there have been efforts to categorize losses in lives to put it bluntly, and resources as well. And I know what's also been calculated is every dollar spent for USAID is equivalent to this amount on return on investment back to the US. I forget who did those kinds of projects. I saw them earlier in the year, but they definitely do exist, and I'd recommend checking that out. I hope that made sense.
Thank you. Yeah, and Zaina and Jacob, do you have any response about kind of balancing a rise in nationalism with multilateral or other approaches to aid and development?
I mean, theoretically,
Sure,
Jacob, please go for it. Yeah.
I don't know. This is a tough question. Definitely, we can. Definitely, in my country, I can see. I would say the rise of nationalism, even though maybe people around me wouldn't say so. It is. I think I can see it. For me, as other people would like to see this thing as well, would be that. No, I mean the main argument always we get in our organization is like, why should we help other people when we don't get enough ourselves? That's like the main question that I get when I tell people. So when people ask me what I do for work and I tell them what I do for work, they ask me this, like, why would, and we are, the money that we use are from the Czech national budget, right? It's a tiny portion of it, but we operate with other people, like other people's money, right? So they always ask us this, and then I don't know. It's a difficult question, and it always makes me sad to see if that other people don't realize that we are all the same. We are all just people, and then it's necessary to help others that are less privileged, right? And it doesn't matter what your color of your skin is or where you live. And then the portion of the budget that we allocate to these project is it's so tiny. It wouldn't make a difference for those people in Czech Republic. They ask me, why are we throwing this money away to Africa, etc. And it just makes me angry just talking about this. Sorry, I cannot be more constructive.
Yes, Naomi, I mean, I think my answer is going to be very similar to Jacob. My current position, I mean, nationalism is definitely a thing, but the way we function is we're funding driven, so we're project driven. Actually, all our funding until recently, until after the cuts, we were not registered to fundraise locally. So all our funds came from abroad. So we didn't have that critique, I guess, from people because the funding was all coming from abroad. Going back to the previous question, that was one of the models we had to do to kind of improvise or to deal with the current funding sectors that we now are registered for local fundraising. So that's going to be definitely a question or a comment we start hearing. But because of the nature of our funding, we haven't had that. But in general, theoretically, in the country, maybe other organizations that do work abroad with Egyptian money, that's definitely something that people hear. And even within the country, if money goes towards, because we've got many people that are, whether refugees, migrants, so if money goes towards other nationalities, you definitely hear it in the streets. Why them and not us? But I think that's unfortunately a question we're going to be hearing until people are just more aware or more educated. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some wisdom that comes from grassroots organizing in motivating people through self-interest, and some people, their self-interest is in humanity and dignity and everyone prospering together. But some people are self-interested by what James or Jim was mentioning is the soft power diplomacy of aid and how that significantly increases security for nations that are able to offer that. And I'll pass it back to David.
Yeah, just to touch on the nationalism and isolationism piece, it is true that, of course, that the U.S. and other countries throughout the world are going through a time of nationalism and isolationism. It's worth remembering, though, that number one, lots of people in our government are still adamant supporters of humanitarian aid, both on the Republican and the Democratic side. Unfortunately, those voices weren't loud or strong enough to fight back well against the executive branch earlier this year. The second part is this country is still made up of very generous people who want to help. And my firm belief is if the mission and work of USAID was kind of broadcast and really made part of our national dialogue much earlier, there would have been an effective pushback and the dismantling of USAID would have been stopped. So I think in this moment in the humanitarian and development sector, there's still lots of room for grassroots action. And I also believe that the sector will come back. I'm not sure in what form, but it's going to come back pretty strong in the next couple of years, and I think sooner rather than later. How that looks and how it compares to what it was before January of 2025, I'm not sure. But I think the field will survive this moment and come back.
Yeah, I want to address more explicitly, we're talking about like the tensions that come from nations that primarily give and receive aid. And some of that is the nature of life, and some of it is an artificial system that is just the remnant of colonialism. And I know there's been a lot of decolonial work happening for decades in the field. So in light of all of the transitions, put lightly, in the last year, what has that conversation been about decolonialism in, I guess most of y'all are in the development field, but has that been a continued discussion? Is that put on the back burner as there's panic about funding? Or Or how are people having that conversation now?
I can start. So prior to January, of course, it was a huge topic of conversation. Since February, I'm not sure if it's because I've been out of the sector for so long or not, but it seems like the conversation about localization has just kind of shut down, and it's more just discussions about short-term survival. As I said, I think now is a really great moment to rebuild systems that put localization much more at the center. And I know what has survived the cuts are really doing that. For instance, with humanitarian aid organizations, I know that they're hiring much more local staff, which I think is a great move, one for affordability, as funding availability is much less, and the impact of what programming does exist.
Maybe just to add to that, Naomi, I mean, I echo what David just said. Just in Save the Children, we actually had to do a restructuring for the whole organization. A part of what that entailed is actually ensuring that if national calibers are present, that the senior management team is localized or is nationalized. So that was one of the biggest shifts I think I've seen being talked. I've been with Save the Children for 3 or 4 years now. I've seen this being talked about, but it's actually coming into action now. A part of it is, like David said, it's definitely more cost efficient, but I also think it's more, not just cost efficient, but it's just more efficient in general, because you don't need to teach that person the context, the ways of working, and so on. So this is definitely a positive move I've seen. But also I think localization, not just in terms of staffing, but in terms of really having partner-led implementation as a priority, rather than if it's a donor requirement, we do it. But now it's actually the first approach we think of, because it's more cost efficient, it's closer to communities we work in, and it also reduces our operational costs. So seeing big organizations seeing themselves as a technical expert that kind of provides support to local organizations, but rather than direct implementers. And I think that's a very good shift that we're seeing more and more on the ground.
Thank you. And Jacob?
Yeah, just quickly from my side, unfortunately, like the topic of decolonialization and colonialism in general, unfortunately, it's not a big topic in my country from what I experienced overseas. Maybe partly because Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia wasn't a colonial country, but that doesn't mean that it's not an important topic. I think it is, especially here in Europe. And yeah, I wish that people around me and people that I'm working with would take this topic more seriously and discuss it a little bit more. And it was always interesting for me traveling for work, or even traveling, that you would tend to see the former countries, the former colonizer doing development projects in the countries that they formerly colonized, right? So you could see a lot of sort of Italian influence in Ethiopia, where I work, or see a lot of German influence in Namibia, right? And this pattern sort of continues, I think. And I think that the topic of decolonialization is more than ever relevant right now as well. And I might even maybe the topic of neocolonialism, right? So we have to always, I think, stay vigilant and with our senses. And for what we are calling international development aid, I think might slowly slip into some form of neocolonization, right? So we need to make sure that our work is not to just benefit our governments. And I'll just end on this note.
Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure that I'm not overlooking anything in the chat. I think we addressed either verbally or over message most of the questions in there, but David and panelists, let me know if there's a question that I'm missing. I think even nationally, I'm from Virginia in the United States, and we nationally are losing SNAP benefits, which provides food to low-income families. Virginia has decided to cover where the gap is, where they drop SNAP benefits for people, to cover that for Virginians. And even a lot of churches and nonprofits have stepped in to bolster more of the feed more in different organizations that distribute food. So I think it is interesting, the unintended positive consequences. Like, it's not, no one prefers to lose funding for these critical issues. It is interesting to see the forced localization, which can provide some agency sometimes when it's back in the hands of the people that it most affects. I guess I'll go into final question then, if we have time, or we're out of time. David?
Take another question.
Okay, what do you think? What do you think that we should be holding the most? What is the biggest goal or value or mission that development and humanitarian aid should be holding closely as we move forward in the these turbulent times?
I can start, and this is something I've been personally reflecting upon, and I think what we should really hold on upon is the purpose. Sometimes, especially if you're not a staff member on the ground, on the fields, you forget why we're doing what we're doing and what the true meaning behind, and oftentimes, to be very transparent, it sometimes feels like a corporate job. And that's when you really should know it's you need to remind yourself that it's not. So if there's one thing we should keep reminding ourselves of, it's the purpose. It's what we do. We're not working for a paycheck every month, because if we were, I don't think we would be in this field.
That's a great reminder.
For me, for instance, I think it's gonna be something similar to Zaina, or maybe a bit different, but I keep telling myself that like I can always get a job at corporate or in a private company, or maybe not, but I like to tell this to myself. Right now, I'm happy that I am in this sector and that to me personally, my job makes some sense. And if that stops in the future, so be it. Yeah, like this.
For me, it's perseverance and recognizing that this is just a moment. It's a very difficult moment and dark moment. This year has been, for me personally, I mean, losing my job and then a job I signed up for with USAID that I was really excited about. It's just been a whole bunch of tumult. But as a historian, you know, if you look back at history, that there's been these kinds of moments throughout time. Everything rebounds, this will, and when it does rebound, the sector is going to need talented young people with fresh ideas who are passionate about making the world a better place to rebuild it. And I think it's up to us young people to kind of rebuild the development and humanitarian sector in the image that we want and make it better than ever before. And I think at some point soon we'll have an opportunity to do that.
Thank you. I love the hopefulness and the vision and the heart behind. Clearly, y'all are taking that into every day at work, not just this panel. So I really am just heartened to know that y'all are out there, and I had a great time hearing from you today.